Welcome to Line Change, a podcast about hockey, social issues, and change makers in the game we love. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Line Change. I'm your host, Ian Kennedy, and today we are going to talk to a very special guest, Irfan Chaudhry, who is the brand new Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Hockey Canada. Taking on this new role right now can't be easy for Irfan after the year that Hockey Canada has had, being embroiled in scandal having to do with sexual abuse allegations between 2018 back to 2003 and long before that even. Following that, we of course heard the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage interrogate just about every member of Hockey Canada that there was, resulting in CEO Scott Smith stepping down. We also saw a brand new board of directors put in place. All of these things tell us that change is happening at Hockey Canada. But what's really being done? We don't know those answers yet. And hopefully, through his insight, his background as an educator, a lecturer, a human rights advocate, Irfan Chaudhry will be able to help us understand those intricacies. Irfan comes from MacEwan University, where he was a lecturer and their director of the Human Rights Office. He also has lectured on topics such as hate crimes and extremism, race and ethnicity, as well as sociology courses, bringing a wealth of knowledge to this conversation. It's time for a line change. I'm Ian Kennedy with guest Irfan Chaudhry. I'm wondering if maybe you can just start by telling people, how does this all connect? How does your research, your experience, what you're bringing to the table here from your past life, you as a person, I guess, too, how does that all weave into this great hockey landscape that we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, no, great question. And again, thanks so much for the opportunity to chat. I've been involved in the EDI space for most of my career. And, having it embedded within, everything I do in my DNA, for someone like me who is, a person of color, a religious minority in Canada, this is, it's 24/7 for me. So, it's one of those pieces where I think when you see some of the obstacles and barriers that are prevalent in sports in general, but also hockey more specifically, I feel my experience brings a lot to the table. I think my diversity of viewpoints from outside a hockey setting, I think, can bring in some new, fresh ideas that can definitely be applied to a hockey setting, both in terms of, governance, leadership, education, awareness, different connection points there. I also, play at a very, 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 very poor level. Thursday night hockey, right? But I think just even seeing the importance of being connected to a team, regardless of what level you play. Now also having young kids involved in sports. Soccer is the one that my eldest seems to be gravitating towards, but facing similar questions around. We tried hockey, but also the reality of accessibility of the sport and different considerations there. So I think a lot of it now is just kind of funneling in together very, very organically over the last number of years, especially with my involvement 2 years back when we got a grant from the federal government's anti-racism action program. I applied through our university to establish and develop, Canada's first anti-racism resource for a hockey setting. And I think that has what kind of got me, I kind of snuck in, I guess you could say, in the hockey world because of that project. But just even, connecting with different people involved in the hockey ecosystem, from, up in a hockey base here in Edmonton to, Hockey for Youth in Toronto, and even some of the work that Devin Buffalo is doing here with his Indigenous sports camp within the province of Alberta. I just saw like a lot of interesting work happening that, seem to not get the same layer of awareness or appreciation in terms of what they're foundationally trying to do, is to bring more diverse kids into a sport to build a more inclusive hockey system. So through that, Grow the Game, .hockey, anti-racism resources for a hockey setting, I was able to just stay connected with Hockey Canada. They invited me to be part of their EDI advisory group, which they established a couple of years back. And then when this role popped up, I felt I've kind of already done some of the work. Why not continue it? Because I thought there was so much more that I can kind of contribute and provide. So that's the believe it or not the short version of how I got involved.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love that your project was called Grow the Game, because right now I'm writing a weekly column for the Hockey News website that is titled Growing the Game, and it's trying to focus on a lot of the really good things that are happening, talking about some of the portions of the sport that have been less discussed, whether that's women's hockey or para ice hockey. I've been following along with the developments for the blind hockey
Right.
organization in Canada here, and the blind hockey national championships and all these different events. And it's so inspiring to see people do that.
Yeah.
Um, and also, hey, everybody's meant to play hockey in some way, shape, or form if they want to. So your Thursday night, no shade thrown to that, because it's. I think that's what we all want with Hockey Canada, right? We want a space to fit into, whether it's recreationally, competitively, or as a fan. And that's I appreciate, just even the idea that we all have that spot. So
Yeah.
before I go into the good stuff, though, I think it would be impossible to talk about your newly created role without talking about where we are in the world of hockey right now. Obviously, Hockey Canada has had this reckoning over the last year, I guess now almost.
Yeah.
It comes with abuse, toxic culture. Uh, Scholars and those around the game have been talking about the misogyny and racism and homophobia forever, it seems like. And it's just all bubbling to the surface right now. It's becoming a real talking point. And I think personally, over the last year, watching people actually talk about it and actually acknowledge that there is need for change has been, something positive that's come from such a horrible news cycle. But here you are, you're dropped right into the middle of this. There's a brand new board of directors. Everything is happening in Hockey Canada to create this change. And you've been plopped into a spot, um, with a game that so many people tie to the national identity in Canada. Um, and I'm just wondering, what does that feel like? What does the moment feel like? And how do you personally proceed from here? Because people are watching Hockey Canada probably to a magnitude that's never been seen before in the history of the organization.
Yeah, and I mean, as they should, right? I've been following along the stories as well. Um, during that time frame, being a part of that EDI advisory committee, even asking myself, is this what I want to be a part of, given what's being shared nationally? But I think what I've observed, even having someone like Hugh Fraser at least at the helm for now with the board chair, whether it was me or just regardless having a position like this at a senior leadership level, I think that highlights some of the appetite that I've observed, very very on the outside layer as an advisor, initially seeing that there's the appetite for change. And I think what I would expect, not only just of myself, but even others who are going to be involved with this work, both within the organization, but also, I think I've read some of your items that share, this is something that has to be shared collectively, from members to players to coaches to volunteers to parents. Like, there's a whole plethora of involvement that needs to be all going towards the same direction. And I think, one of the things we observed with Grow the Game, what people were asking for, one for sure was education and awareness. I guess that's two things. The third thing was accountability. Right. And I think now you're seeing some of those pieces be put into place, whether it's, with that rule, what is it, rule 11.4, where you have,
Mhm.
aspects of discrimination as well that are included. I think public reporting and tracking of that will help with some of that transparency. But more importantly, what's being done about it, right? And so I think that's where the collective strength that someone like myself in this role can provide based on previous experience, but also working collaboratively with some of the other leaders at the table. And then even I've come to learn that many of the membership organizations over the last number of years have also established their own either ad hoc or formal EDI related committees. And so I'm really excited to connect with those groups specifically to see how we can support and supplement and collaborate on the work. But more importantly, like what would they see as Hockey Canada in terms of being, providing whether ownership, accountability, guidance, legitimacy, like all of the above, I think is really
Hmm.
important to be able to elevate the work that's already happening. And so that's where I'm really excited about, because you do see people, most people who have been involved in this game for a long time, what I've come to learn and observe is, the ones that want change, especially, are not satisfied with the status quo, and that's a good starting point for work like mine, because it's not saying there won't be resistance, but at least I'm at a starting point where I can have a friendly reminder of saying, hey, if we don't work on these things to make us as inclusive as we can be, just think back to what you all have just experienced, and we can never ever have that ever again, because that trust factor is so critical and key. And I think to your point, it's an identity that all of us take very, very seriously, to a point where it's fandom, of course. But if people don't feel connected to that identity, if they feel disconnected from that identity, or they don't feel represented by that identity, then there's some work that can be done to ensure that we have a more inclusive and respectful sport where everyone can engage at whatever level they wish to be a part of.
Hmm. And of course, that's, as you mentioned, we want people to engage and we want those barriers gone because uh, everyone should be able to experience the benefits of playing hockey. But that's, of course, not the reality at the moment, is that not everyone
Yeah.
feels that space is theirs. And so it is really important. And I do believe, there's going to be pushback for people, anyone else that comes into roles similar to yours to make this change, of course. But we have to point out those shortcomings and we have to talk about them. And that's a lot of what people criticize me for, is that I talk
Mm,
about the bad things that are going on, but I'm talking about the bad things to make us aware. Because if we weren't aware of what happened
100%.
with Hockey Canada, with
Yeah.
the scandals that went on, the abuse that has been alleged, we wouldn't be having these conversations and we wouldn't be trying to make it better. So sometimes I guess we have to see those downfalls and negatives and learn from them. And that's another portion of what,
Yeah.
when your job was announced, when you were hired, a quote came out where you used the word transformation. And to me, it really seems like that's what it needs to happen right now. We kind of need to put hockey in this cocoon, um, take some time and see what comes out the other side, because um, it will take time. I don't think that anyone should expect that we're going to see a brand new Hockey Canada come out of the gate for next hockey season, or that we're going to have every issue resolved in the game immediately. I mean, we're talking about massive structural change. So I think I'd like to ask you, um, what do you think does come out of this at the end? What's the big picture of Hockey Canada, where if you could close your eyes and imagine it, where's it going to be, and what comes out of that transformation that you discussed?
Yeah, and I was very deliberate in my use of transformation, when I was asked to, provide, comment on my excitement to join, because I think, you're right, you hit the nail on the head, right, based on not just what's been happening in the most recent of years. I think, what was it, in 2015, where, that picture of the current Hockey Canada board made its cycles
Hmm.
online, saying, I don't think this is a very diverse representation of Canadians at a broad level. I think that awareness piece has been there, but with awareness comes action, right? And so I think when you have these types of initiatives, again, whether you have grassroots EDI committees that are helping grow the game in their own communities, whether you have senior leadership positions like this that can start to help create some structure, some visions, some endpoints, end state. I often get the question in terms of, what's the ideal end state for like EDI work? And I think that's always a shifting evolution, right? Because you
Hmm.
want to get to a space where, okay, we've achieved this much. okay, now let's get to the next cycle, right? And
And
I
I hate
think
I
when you
hate
look at
that with
you,
people where they kind of they talk about, and sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
they
that's okay.
say the moving goalposts. Well, if we didn't move the goalposts, we would never continue to make progress. You kind of like
100%.
it's
Yeah,
no team in hockey would be happy staying status quo. Every player in the league is working to improve. Every coach is working to find a new way to do things. So if we just think about it from that standpoint, I mean, if we
100%.
turn down innovations in equipment or personal
Yeah,
training, people would
yeah,
be stagnant and there'd be no growth in the game. You wouldn't see a hockey player like Connor McDavid right now.
yeah.
Um, and so to that point, what you're saying, I think is 100% applicable. We have to, there is no end goal. Um, of course, we can talk about like a utopia, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, but you're spot on, right? Because I think oftentimes in this work, I always get asked questions from people who maybe, are not as reflective of various identities. They ask me, what's the end goal? What are the quotas? How do we know we're succeeding? And I always like to respectfully push back and say, especially in a role like this, if you look at the mission for Hockey Canada's positive hockey experiences for everyone involved, to me, that is the ideal end goal. And to get there, we need to make sure that we're actually acting on that.
Mhm.
And the moments that we're not, we need to make sure that there is, whether policy, processes, accountabilities, all those need to be present in a way that is intentional, and also in a way that rebuilds back that trust, right? And I think that's something I'm very, very cognizant of, to ensure that that trust is being built. It's not going to happen just with one position, but I think when you have that kind of shared across the organization and real accountability is connected to those actions, that's where I hope the trust can be built. But I also think voices like yours are super important because it speaks to, individual actions, of course, but you're also speaking towards some of those systemic issues and barriers and perspectives that oftentimes people don't want to see or like to ignore, because it's going to impact, their enjoyment of the game, or other inaccurate tropes that I've kind of just observed over the last number of years, where when you ask people, what are you actually afraid of in terms of having a more equitable and inclusive sporting environment? Do you not want any kid of any background to join a sport and fall in love with it in the same way you maybe had when you grew up? And most people would likely say, yeah, that's what I want. But then when you start adding the noise around DEI specifically right now, people start to get misconstrued information, where you really have what academic literature kind of speaks to is a very strong zero sum game, where some from a very homogenous community feel by making the sport more accessible, more diverse, it's at the expense of us. And that's
Mhm.
not inclusion, right? The spirit of inclusion is not to be exclusionary. The spirit of inclusion is to be truly inclusive. And so attention may need to be paid towards certain demographics because of barriers, but by no means is it trying to eliminate or erase anyone else from the sport. It's trying to create equitable playing fields. But to sometimes sell that approach, it can be a challenge for sure.
Well, we could talk about the historical basis of that in a country like the United States, where the Republican
Yeah.
Party used to be the more liberal of the
Yeah.
two, and it's kind of turned into the other side where it seems like that conservative group of people will kind of do anything to make sure that there's still someone else below them on the pecking order, which is kind of that
Yeah.
zero sum approach of
Yeah.
they're not trying to eliminate anyone. They're not trying to take the opportunities from anyone. We're just trying to open barriers for all people, because I think that that's
Yeah.
what this whole, especially in sport, that's there's less. Of course, there politics plays into sports, but it's not this space where we are consistently talking about that. We just don't want the historic political policies and structures of oppression that are there to impact something like this that we should all love. And that's kind of my plays right into my next question for you, which is how do we change these minds that are so entrenched? Looking at this from your experience, because of course, hockey fans are very entrenched in their beliefs. If you talk about fighting, let's say, you're going to get a
Mm.
very polarized answer. Pride nights recently have become
Yeah.
an enormous
Yeah.
source of pushback where Um, a group of people are really banking on Pride nights as visibility and just a note that you're welcome. Not even that everyone agrees with everything, but that you're welcome in that space.
Yeah.
Para ice hockey being underfunded. We see barriers for people of color. Um, and probably now more than any time, we're not on the same page in some ways. And in some ways, we are on the same page. With Hockey Canada, I think most people, I think there was a survey that came out saying something like 60% of people do agree that there's a need for change within the organization of Hockey Canada. And so that's in the hockey world right now. I think that's a pretty good number, where we get that idea. But if we don't change the minds of the coach, the player, the volunteer, the timekeeper, the everybody involved in the game
Well,
to get on
yeah.
board with these policies, I don't know how it works. So, from your experience, whether it's in education or any other format or venue, how do we change minds? How do we shift opinions to be more inclusive?
Yeah, I mean that's always a $1 million question, right? Because you have people that are going to be entrenched with their perspectives. For the most part, since this announcement came through, I've received some, I would say 99.9% of the feedback I've received has been very, very positive and very supportive. But I've also received some very interesting emails and at replies, you know, claiming me and EDI are going to spoil and wreck the game of hockey. I had one person who said, what do you know about hockey? You've never been on the ice. They, of course, didn't know I play every Thursday night in Division 4B. But I say that with all due respect, in the sense of so regardless if it's within hockey, it's within corporations or the work world or within communities, you do have like this momentum happening where those that are not on board, especially at a certain demographic level, they just won't be. But
Hmm.
you have people that are there, they're willing, they're ready to go, and then you have that middle that just isn't informed, isn't aware, or wants to get started but doesn't know what to do. And so that to me is where we want to focus our energy on. We already have the people who want to change. So that's awesome. Let's keep supporting them and seeing how we can navigate that with them. But then those that are not sure or uncomfortable or scared or whatever it might be, how can we educate and help them upskill themselves to be comfortable? And now with this role, knowing that there isn't, from our membership perspective at least, they aren't going to be isolated in terms of making these decisions on their own. Why I really want to reach out to the EDI committees to get a sense of what they've been working on, and then also seeing, what can we support? How can you funnel up? But also more importantly, how can we support to ensure you're empowered to do what you feel you need to do? So you have that education piece. I think awareness is critical, as you just talked about. I think, the quote from Brian Burke is likely the one I like quite a bit in terms of what people are kind of missing the point. Awareness is key. My dad always used the analogy: you maybe don't have to celebrate, but you can participate, right?
Mm.
And I think that awareness and participation as a team is critical because the name escapes me. I think it's Luke Prokop. I gotta
Yep.
say,
Yes, that's
his
right.
name. Yeah, even he came out with a tweet saying, is as the first openly gay player, I want to be in a locker room where I know my teammates have my back, and on nights like a Pride night, there's no issue in terms of wearing a jersey or having Pride tape. And so I think that's where we have some of these missed connection points around that awareness piece. And then accountability, like that to me has been something that a lot of the people that are already on the side of EDI, let's say, they just want to know how can we make things accountable, right? So when I do have my son experience a racist slur on the ice, and the on ice official doesn't know what to do, how can I ensure that I'm comfortable now that they do know what to do? Because there's accountabilities being set by the governing body, that no longer can we just ignore these kind of
Hmm.
on ice incidents, and even off ice when you've seen some of the things happen in the stands. But because we don't have that proper funneling, it's really at the expense of you and I to either take that on or ignore it, because there's nothing kind of governing us to take that action. And that's why I think, again, at least having that 11.4 rule is a starting point. But now some of the conversations is making sure it's applied in a consistent way. And so how can we even inform the different people responsible to ensure it's being done in a consistent way. One of the things I've observed oftentimes when it's around addressing something like bias or discrimination, people are afraid to act because they don't want to make the wrong decision, because then they're scared they're going to be in trouble. So I think it's breaking down some of those fears that they may have and really putting in some autonomy in their decision making, so they're comfortable in knowing this rule is connected to, this signatory of safe sports, or our commitment as a member of Hockey Canada. We know that the governing body will have our back, so we are appropriate to make this decision. I think that's what sometimes gets missed on the on ice pieces. So a lot of education, awareness, and accountability, I think, is how I'd frame it.
Yeah, I continuously talk about the importance of educating right from the day that someone picks up a stick until their final skate leaves the ice, and that's something that I'll stand by as long as I get to talk about these things. And one of the thinking back to Brian Burke's quote, I loved it as well. I think that there's one term that gets thrown around a lot that, and I'm just talking off my own script here and going out in a limb, but the term welcoming, it comes to me a lot, where people want to create these welcoming spaces, welcoming and inclusive. And that's great, I think. However, when you welcome someone in, it places, in my opinion, a little bit of a power imbalance, because obviously someone has the power to welcome you or to not. And they're still the gatekeeper. It's on their terms that you're welcomed to that
Yeah,
space. And so I don't like that necessarily. I'd
yeah,
rather go with, that you're affirmed in that space, that you're who you are as a person, your identity, your
yeah,
being is not just welcome there, but it is celebrated, and it is um, valued, and it's
yeah,
more about the justice and equity portion than it is about just being inclusive. Because people say, well, this is inclusive, I included you, I invited you to this event. But when you're
yeah,
there, if you're still facing microaggressions or
yeah.
whatever, it's not
You're
really,
not welcome.
yeah, right, yeah, it's like it's this whole
Yeah,
circular thing where we really need to push on, but we're still not even at welcoming. So I think that's the
yeah,
you know that's where we are, and there's obviously work to be done in all facets. So
yeah.
so my last question for you, I think your hiring was a great thing. And like you said, when you got that announcement that came out, you received some good, some bad. If you ever need to feel better, just drop yourself into my Twitter replies. And
I've seen it. I've
yeah,
seen it. Yeah, you deal with a lot,
it's
so kudos to you.
it's
Yeah,
pretty. I don't know.
it gets angry.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
gets angry. Sure. Yeah. It could, if you wanted to believe every word that was there, you could feel pretty bad about yourself. But,
yeah, 100%.
that's not the purpose for me doing it. So that's neither here nor there. But when I saw your announcement, though, there was enough people coming out with, I'll see it, or I'll believe it when I see it, or that it's not enough, or it's too little too late, or the harm's already been done.
Yeah,
And of course, some of those things are true. The harm has been done in terms of that, but um, I guess people are still saying, and you've mentioned this a couple times, that they've lost all trust for Hockey Canada, and to a point, I understand. Um, there obviously there had to be some significant changes, and I think that from what I've witnessed since those first days, since we've got a new board in place, um, we're seeing some things, and that's a really great first step. Um, so I know you don't speak for the entire organization, and I know this takes a lot of time to build, but how would you respond to those folks out there that say they have no trust, that they say that they don't think they'll ever have trust again? So how might you, I guess, give them hope that trust could possibly be formed?
yeah, and I think those are fair comments as well. And I can appreciate where they're coming from because of what we've all kind of observed over the last, year now. I think we're coming up to, and I think with those pieces, the work will, I'm hoping, speak for itself to kind of rebuild that trust. I think I'm joining an organization where I feel the right momentum's in place, because I often got the question, based on, oh, you're going to Hockey Canada, do you think anything's actually going to change based on what people have been hearing and observing? And in my interaction points, I'm a pretty good judge of character. And the amount of sincerity that I've come across so far with the people who are, they're trying to, get that transformation going. I have no reason to believe that they aren't sincere in their efforts. And so I think with that amount of momentum and energy, that trust can be rebuilt back. Of course, with time, but I think that trust can be rebuilt back with some of the actions that we see. I know the biggest piece is still left to be filled in terms of like the new lead for the organization, and I think that in itself will also speak volumes in terms of where the organization can go. I think one thing I'm really inspired by, a position like this one could have been defaulted until the new leader came on board. And, I've seen this in other organizations. They can determine if they want this position at whatever level. But knowing that the board and other senior leaders were so heavily importantly raising the importance of a position like this to be at that leadership table, to be a part of leadership, I think that speaks to that transformation piece. So, I can definitely appreciate where that lack of trust is from. I do not blame them, and I think that's where the work will start to rebuild that trust.
Yeah, it's a long process, but
It will
I'm
be.
glad that you're here to do it. And I think that as you mentioned there, part of the issue is going to be everyone within the organization trusting each other to do these roles, without all of that, potential micromanagement that might have kept the old systems in place a little bit longer, 50 years or
Yeah.
so, than they should have been. And, moving forward, that's there's hope, in my opinion. And, I did take the stance originally that I thought we kind of had to burn this completely to the ground and build up. But I don't know, maybe it's, in using hockey terms, maybe it's more of a retooling than a rebuilding. And I hope that we can get there sooner than later. But Irfan, thank you so
Yeah, I
much
agree.
for taking some time to talk to me. That's all I have for you today. I really appreciate your insights and you giving us some new information on where Hockey Canada is going and where this sport in Canada is going as a whole.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity. Great questions, great conversation, and keep up your work as well. I think the voice you have to raise awareness is one I've followed for quite a while now. So I look forward to kind of learning more from you as well. But thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you for joining me on this conversation of line change with Irfan Chaudhry as my special guest. I hope you learned a few things about the future direction of Hockey Canada. Trust me, I'm still a skeptic, but I do believe with people like Irfan in place, we have some hope moving forward. And that's what this show is all about, discussing the issues, but also discussing solutions. And I think that Irfan advised us on several of the things that Hockey Canada will be focusing on in the future. Ideally, someday, we don't have to worry about racism, we don't have to worry about homophobia, we don't have to worry about ableism in sport, and the game that we all love can become a space for everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Ian Kennedy, and this was Line Change.